And sometimes we get into trouble because we don't know we're in a transformation. We think something is terribly wrong, and actually something is right. Something is terribly right. You're moving along, you're growing, you're developing, but it doesn't feel that way at first.
How do we navigate the challenges of the new world of work?
How can we do things differently, transforming our people and our organisations for the better?
It turns out there's quite a lot of later stage people in there, but they're hiding.
One of the things that surprised us when we first started working with the VUCA skills is how bad they were. Like, nobody had them.
The confusing aspect of the transformation process, and to consider in their own mind, maybe something right is going on with me.
Who is challenging our thinking and living at the edge of work?
And what can we all do to embrace new ways of working?
The reality is not a single job is without impact.
Around that want to try a different way of working, I think now's a really unique opportunity to do so.
Welcome to the What's Next podcast. I'm Dave Yates.
And I'm Peter Holliday. Today, we have the pleasure of speaking to Terri O'Fallon. She's a researcher, teacher, coach, and spiritual director. She's also the creator of the Stages model and the Stages International website, where she trains people, coaches, and consultants from around the world on using the developmental stages model that she created to improve people and their businesses that they work in. Her interests lie in experimenting with evolutionary human systems and the levels of development from cradle to the grave.
Terri is a partner of Stages International, which creates programs based on the Stages model. And Terri holds a master's degree in special education in spiritual direction and an integral PhD in transformative learning and change. Welcome, Terri.
Welcome, Terri. It's great to see you.
Yes, it's been really quite a long time since we've spent any time together. So I really appreciate the opportunity to spend some time with you now.
Where are you joining us from today?
I'm joining you from Lewistown, Montana. It's a tiny little town in the middle of a very rural state. It has 6,000 people in it, but it has every level of development in this little town. So it's quite an interesting town.
Oh, fantastic. Well, thanks for being here with us. Really, really appreciate you making the time. One of the things we like to do is kick off with a check-in just to get, I guess, level set the conversation and get things started. So given we're recording this in January of 2022, what's one thing you're very glad to have left behind in 2021, and what's something you're welcoming this year in 2022?
Well, the way I operate is, past, present, and future has to be held all together so that you can make agile choices. And so there's nothing I want to leave behind. And there's, the future out there is really not really known well, but there's a multiple set of choices. So I have to use the present with the past and the future interfaced with that. Mm-hmm. And that allows the agility. So I don't really think in those terms so much anymore. I used to, but I guess I don't anymore.
More integrated. I like it. That's good. How about you, Pete?
Oh, one thing I'm glad to see left behind. I don't actually know whether I don't think it's left behind yet. I'd like to see it get left behind is the division that I've noticed through, and whether it's a default or a shift backwards to like one black versus white thinking, like the whole vaccination versus anti-vaccination, like how polarized and fixed people are on their own position and how inflexible they are to, seeing something other than what they see. And I think, as we dive into today about, stages and object relations and all of those kinds of things, it's a really interesting context. And one thing that I'm welcoming in 2022 is I'm hoping that a lot of what I've just spoken about is we're starting to find some common grounds, the third way, something sitting in the middle where people can have a little bit more openness. It's really interesting to see that when people get a certain level of fear around things, it's been enlightening to see people's reactions to that fear about and that uncertainty and how and where people go to as their home base when they're challenged in that way. So I'm hoping maybe that a little bit of that gets left behind and a little bit more openness comes in 2022.
I like it. I like it. I think I'm saying goodbye to a huge amount of complexity. 2021 was hard last year for a number of reasons. And so I'm embracing going into 2022 a stepping down of the level of complexity, which has been a conscious decision to do that. And with that also coming into, I guess, a pursuit of more, I don't know, I was listening to someone talk about it as embodiment. I'm not quite sure exactly what the word is, but being more present in both mind and body in the moment, and not thinking about everything so much all the time, if that makes sense, which is a practice for me. I think that's going to be a really interesting. Yeah, Pete's laughing because he knows that I overthink about everything. So the idea of even just being present in the moment seems almost foreign. So that's the experiment for this year that I'm welcoming.
Excellent.
Very good.
Good reflections.
It's been a very interesting couple of years, I think, for many people in this world. It's
It really has. Yes.
We've learned a lot about everyone, including ourselves, I think.
So one thing we always start off with in our podcast, Terri, is asking people, because some of the guests we have aren't necessarily some of the more traditional academic guests. We have people that are quite unique, like yourself, who have ended up where they are as thought leaders or specialists in particular things through very, very unique pathways rather than traditional. Some are traditional, but a lot of them seem to not be. So it'd be interesting to hear, just if you would mind telling us a little bit about your journey and how you became one of the sort of preeminent developmental theorists and model designers of the 21st century.
Happy to do that. Well, I've been a teacher for 59 years, if you can believe that.
Yep.
And I have to say I've learned way more from any of my students than I have taught them. I started out with an elementary teaching degree, and I taught elementary school for 5 years. And then I went ahead and got my master's in special education, and then I opened a corporation that worked for the deinstitutionalization of developmentally disabled adults in our state. And I ran that for 7 years. It was a beautiful experience for me working with those very, very special people. Then I was a public school administrator for 15 years. I was a principal of an elementary school. I had held 2 school superintendencies in 2 different districts. And then I was a federal programs director in public schools. And when I finished that, I went and got my PhD, and then I've taught in many colleges and universities in various positions. And along the way, of course, you run into developmental, the understanding of developmental, even if you don't study it, even if you haven't heard of it before, it starts becoming apparent, and then you start looking for it. And that's what happened to me. So I was just so enamored with the experience with so many of my students in their developmental changes, because I watched them change through the years. And then I guess the next thing that happened was that I met Suzanne Greuter, and I took a scoring course from her. And I had been doing research since I was 34 years old, working with the public schools. I had done a research on every position that I had. So I was fascinated with research too. And so I was scoring, and at that time I had helped set up the GTC program with which Jeff Fitch and Abigail Lynham are operating now. And I started a longitudinal study for our GTC program, which means we gave everybody a developmental inventory, and I scored them because I was the only one that was certified to score. I scored everybody in that program when they came in, and then 2 years after, for as long as they would agree to take it. And so we got this long-standing longitudinal idea how do people develop, and how long does it take them to get from one developmental level to another, and can they skip stages, and all of the questions that people have, about development. And that study is still running today. It's probably 15 years old now.
Wow. So you've still got willing participants 15 years on.
They, some people, would do it every 2 years, 5 times, and then they drop out. And then, of course, you had 5 cohorts who are coming in. And so we always have somebody that is doing a retake.
Awesome.
And even if they don't do the retakes in a regular fashion, you still can see how they progressed and how long it took them to get to whatever stage they get to. So there's still value in that. And I still score some of those inventories, though I don't work with the GTC program anymore.
Could you give us a little bit, just for people out there who aren't familiar with GTC at generating transformative change, could you just give a brief, 1-minute outline on the program? And obviously people get scored coming into the program and scored going out or a couple of years later, but I'm sure listeners would like to know exactly what the GTC program is and what it entails, if only briefly.
Well, it was one of the most interesting and enjoyable programs I ever helped develop. But it's evolved a lot in the last number of years. We started out as a consultants training program, and we went in, we trained people how to go in and do consultation in business with people. And that was an 18-month program. And there were 4 of us that started it, and 2 of the people left, and we brought another person in then, and she had a great influence on our work. And we shortened the program up to a 9-month program and made it more of a personal development kind of a program, and worked with people to develop their own projects and see how they could develop their own projects in the world, whatever that would be. And it was everything from how am I going to be a good spiritual teacher to consultation in organizations. I mean, you name it, they had just a lot of different projects. And of course, there was always a community project too. So it's an evolving process. And I think it's still just I stay in touch with Jeff and Abigail frequently. And I just think it's a great program. I still, even though it's not the same one that it was when I left, it still seems to me like a very, very good program. And the people that I know that are in there now and have been in there since I left all give it really good accolades. So I'm happy to see that evolved, because some organizations and process businesses start out beautifully, but then they get stuck and they never have any kind of evolutionary change in their own organizational process. But GTC has evolved, and I did the research on from Suzanne Greuter's processes to my own model called the stages model, and that was my own understanding of the difference between the kind of research that I wanted to do. And it was just the kind of the culminating process, I think, of my life's work. And the thing about it is that it's always been something that is evolving itself. And so the stages model, we started out with a year-long research project. We had 4 scorers. We did a replication study, which is different than a study that just uses iterators, though iterators were involved. And we replicated it with Suzanne's MAP process. And it came out very, very good. So we've been doing research ever since that time. The research continues, and we've got added more and more validation behind what we have. And we've developed more and more products too, as a result of just understanding what it was that we had validated. I mean, we validated something and we knew what that was, but we didn't really know the possibilities. Now, 10 years later, we have so many different ways that we can use the stages model that it's just, it would take a long time to describe all the different ways.
And so just for listeners out there, it's So originally your the stages model started off with Suzanne Cook-Reuter's work, which is the kind of post-autonomous ego development, her MAP profile, which measures, now get me, it's been a while, roughly 10 stages of development. And then yours has extended that to basically 12 stages. And then you've got these sort of sub tiers that sit inside those 12 stages. Could you give us because I love the elegance of the stages model, and I definitely think it's the most sophisticated one that I've ever come across, having been taught quite a few of them now in my elderly age.
The one thing about the stages model is that on the surface of it, it looks pretty simple.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's basically 3 tiers, and you just answer 3 questions, and you can get a developmental level out of that. But behind all of that, we have the 3 questions, and the 3 questions are the answer to the 3 questions are the makeup of a perspective. So the first question is, what kind of phenomena are you looking at? And we just, or objects. And what do you see? Because, people can see some things that other people can't see, especially when it's interior. So that's usually deals with persons, places, and things. So you can have a concrete person, a concrete place, and a concrete thing. But then what is a subtle person? What is a subtle place? And what is a subtle thing? What is a MetAware person? What is a MetAware place? And what is a MetAware thing? You have to make that kind of choice. So you pick the one that seems like it fits you most in your daily life. Then the second question is, do you prefer an individual approach, or do you like a collective approach? And this doesn't just mean teams. It just means, do you have a goal there and you use a team to help you get to that goal? Or do you give your work to the collective so the collective will develop? So you choose whether you're more on your own and you have your own idea about how things can go, and you might get teams to help you, but that's an individual approach. Or you're collaborating with an individual, with a team, with a group of people, and you might not even know exactly what the outcome is going to be until the collaboration is over, and there it is, right in front of it emerges right at the moment, So you choose that. So that's a second question. And the third question is, what's your favorite way to learn? Right now, are you learning by just receiving stuff from other people? You just receive information, you're taking all these courses, you're listening to people, or are you being an active person? You've got all that information now, so you're out there applying it and you're getting better and better, you're skilled. Or is it reciprocal? Is it where you're learning from somebody else and you see things in other people that they don't see in themselves, and you can talk with them about that? Or they look at you and they see things in you that you don't see in yourself, and they can tell you about that. So that's the third one. And the last one is interpenetrative. It's a way of kind of working in a process of almost oneness. So which one of those learning approaches seems to be more like you? Well, when you end up with all the configurations of those 3 questions, you end up with 12 developmental levels. Just by answering 3 questions, it'll point you to the perspective that you're taking, the developmental perspective that you're taking. It doesn't sound like it'd be too hard, does it? But then when you start delving into what each one of those things mean, it will take you to a whole new world. And then when you realize that it's not just you that you can look at that way, you can also look at, as I mentioned before, what is the developmental level of that website? Is it a concrete? Is it subtle? Or is it a MetAware website? Is it, pointed towards individual action? Or is it pointed towards a collective collaboration? Does it point to, they're going to give you all this information and you're going to receive it, or else they're just going to receive it and do that? Or is it an action-oriented one? Is it one where there's real reciprocity? Or is it one that really can interpenetrate all of the knowledge of a big variety of things and make a new one thing out of it? I mean, that question, you look at anything and you can ask those 3 questions about that. We have specialty inventories that work with climate change. What is the perspective people take on climate change? We have one on leadership. What perspectives do leaders take? There's, one we have on love. What perspectives do people take on love and hope? Parenting, psychology. We have inventories that look into the perspectives on maybe 15 or 20 different areas now. Our specialty inventories. And then we have the general one, which is one that most people take. But we can develop whole training programs on any one of those areas, just because, those 3 questions apply basically to everything we do.
Wow, it's fantastic. I wonder, to build on some of the questions Pete's asked so far, are you able to very, very briefly just take us through, I know you've kind of briefly touched on the 12 stages, but just break it into perhaps those 3 areas, the concrete, the subtle, and the MetAware, and just actually deep dive a little bit, because we have talked about various other stages in the podcast before, so it'll be good to contrast where you've gotten your model to compared to what they've probably heard previously.
Yes, well, I'll start with the concrete tier. We have 1.0, and that's basically the infant. We have 1.5, that's egocentric. That's kind of the terrible twos, only it lasts from about 18 months till about 4 years old or thereabouts.
40 years old for some people.
The third one is the 2.0. It's a collective stage, and that's where little kids about the age of 4 really just have to have a friend. And it's a collective stage, and it goes up to about junior high, thereabouts. And then the last one is the conformist stage, where kids, usually in high school, thereabouts, form groups, and the group's principles will drive their behavior more than any other. Even their parents can't drive them like their group does. Mm-hmm. And those principles of that group are so strong that they'll hold the principles even when the group isn't there. So those are the first 4 stages, just a real fast snapshot. Then you get to the subtle stages. Note that the subtle stages are each an upshift of the concrete stages. So you have 1.0, and that shifts up to 3.0. So 1.0 is the infant stage, and they have several qualities that are really quite prominent for them. Up to 18 months, they will learn to pick up a pea with their fingers. So they're looking for perfection with their physical fingers, they look for perfection. So perfection tends to be a part of this 3.0. They are developing a new identity. At 1.0, an infant is trying to figure out, who am I? They don't even know that they have a body at first. And then when they're 18 months old, by about that age, they finally get an identity. Oh, this body is me. 3.0 gets a new identity too. It's a subtle identity. It's, who am I on my interior? And they start getting that and building that. They're perfectionistic though. It's like 110%. Where have you heard that before? What does 110% mean? We see that a lot in athletics, where they have to give 110%. And of course, athletics begin, oftentimes they start in high school, but they really start going in college and at the 19 years old for a while there. So anyway, you have these perfectionistic people. It's a receptive stage. They're learning from receiving from others. They're like a deer in the headlight with this new subtle place. So they keep looking for people that can mentor them, but they want to make sure that these people know what they're talking about. So whether or not they have a certificate that says that they're an expert in this area means a lot to them. So that's then the receptive stage. First stage in the subtle tier. The second stage in the concrete tier is the egocentric. This is the action-oriented little kid that just, goes bashing into everything, completely innocent. They don't know that might be hurting somebody or anything like that, but they own everything. Everything is mine. Upshift to the second stage in the subtle tier is the achiever. And guess what? This is why we have plagiarism laws. This is why we have copyrights. This is why we have brands, because people take ownership of everything they can get their hands on that's subtle. And so this is why we have law and lawsuits and all of this, because people will take anything unless it's nailed down by somebody else and they get into trouble. So you can see how the ownership upshifts to the 3.5 level.
Mhm.
So the 2.0 level in the concrete tier is the one where I want to have a friend and they're in reciprocity with each other. But it's a concrete reciprocity. 4.0 is the third level in the subtle tier. This is the postmodern stage. A lot of stage people call this green. Green is a very beautiful stage. Every single stage has a lot of, has something that is, a blind spot. And green has theirs, but no more theirs than any other stage. So it gets demonized a lot, and there's no reason for it. They're beautiful, beautiful people at this developmental level. And we don't want to have the color green be banned from our wardrobe because people want to stay away from green so much. So anyway, I'm kind of kidding a little bit here. But anyway, these people are in reciprocity. It's just a subtle reciprocity. And I spoke about it a little while ago. You are aware that you can't see everything in yourself. And aware is a word, and a capacity. Awareness comes up at this developmental level and is a critical part. And they also see the parts inside of themselves. Now, a little kid will say, before I go to bed, a part of me wants a snack and the other part of me wants a story, concrete things. Here they'll say, one part of me is miserable because, I want to have this as a profession. And the other part is calling me to be an artist or something like that. They have these subtle parts, and they also have the concrete part. So they have lots of parts that they talk about on their interior. But when it comes to reciprocity, which is a more mature part, I see that you're seeing me, and I see that you see things about me that I can't see about myself. And I would rather know what I don't know about myself, even if it hurts. Mm-hmm. Because I don't want to go running around having people see parts of me that I don't even know about. So they have the courage and the vulnerability to meet with people. And even though it is very hard, and even head knocks and blow-ups and all kinds of things, especially at first, they have the courage to really find out what they're like to other people. So this is a big deal. And if you don't do that, then of course the next stages aren't very good either. And the stage before doesn't do much of that either. So they're missing that vulnerability part. The last stage is called the strategist, and that's the teal. Let's see, it's the teal stage, I believe. It's Suzanne calls it, or did call it, we call it the strategist sometimes, but we usually just use numbers because words get misconstrued. So that's we call it the 4.5 level. And that's where they first discover development. So you see, you have to go through 7 stages before you get to the 8th stage and even see that people develop. And there are many, many people who are arriving at this place, but there are way more people that don't know that yet. So they advocate for developmental rights. And before that, it's not okay to just be who you are. Your perspective, if it doesn't agree with me, you're wrong and I'm right, This developmental level understands that people develop through stages. They have to develop through stages. They see that there's the stages that other people are in are the stage they're supposed to be in, and they have to find a way to work with them, regardless of whether it's what they like or they don't like.
Is this the first stage of the MetAware?
That's the next one. That's 5.0.
Yep.
It's an upshift from 1.0 and 3.0. It's in 5.0. This is where really good deconstruction happens. And in that stage, people start recognizing that conversations are like 2 people crossing in the night, 2 ships crossing in the night, because I'll say something and I and the other person makes meaning of what I say that is different from the meaning I think I'm saying, and vice versa. And we think we come to an agreement, and lo and behold, we find out that the meanings were all mixed up because we put our personal meanings into words. We have dictionaries to try and straighten that out, but it just doesn't do it really. So agreements are very, very difficult to come to when you understand this. And so they get that happens. So one of the questions they ask all the time is, what do you mean by that? You know, so that they can get a better idea. That's a favorite question they have. So they look at the meanings of words and boundaries a lot. The next stage, which is an upshift of the 2.0 egocentric and the 4.0 or 3.5 achiever, this is the 5.5. That one is, it is both deconstructing everything that goes on around them and reconstructing at the same time. So on the exterior, they're like a little kid that is trying to put blocks together so that they stay correctly. It's like the achiever that puts thinking and feeling and behavior together. And those are the building blocks and the metacognition of all of that. This one is taking a whole system and seeing a part of a system that might work and another whole system and see how that might work together, another system, and they can take these parts and pieces of different systems and different aspects of the world, of the planet, and mold them together into something completely new that nobody ever thought they could do. And it is absolutely one of the most passionate creative things that anybody can imagine. It is just so fascinating to watch the things that these folks can create. It's very, very interesting. And they also start having these peak experiences of timelessness and boundlessness, but they can't put them together yet. The next one is the 6.0 stage, and that's the upshift of the 2.0 friends stage in the concrete, the 4.0 reciprocal stage in the subtle tier, and now this one is also reciprocal. But we're in a place now looking at what is a MetAware place, what is a MetAware thing, what is a MetAware person. And so we see that the MetAware person now has kind of transformed into an experience of being timeless and boundless, that there's a whole, you know, if you use a metaphor, a whole sea of not, you know, no beginning and no ending feeling, which they peek into from time to time. And then there's all these concrete objects that float around on the waves and these subtle objects that float around on the waves, and they can see the hugeness of the whole cosmos along with a grain of sand in the concrete tier, and they can hold them together in their consciousness together and see how they're reciprocal with one another. So that's where that reciprocity comes about. And the last one is the 2.5 conformist upshifts to the 4.5 strategist, and then the 6.5 illumined. And this is a stage that Aurobindo talks about. And it's a beautiful stage. People get into some experiences of the non-dual. They have a wider span, and they have a trajectory to that span that the 6.0 stage doesn't have. We don't have as much research on this stage, but more and more people are starting to score there now. I mean, in 10 years, we don't have very many people, but you know, over time, we're building a database of people who are scoring at that stage. So that's where these are the stages that we have data on, and we keep working with our data every year, and we update it. We do qualitative research to see what are these people saying when they answer the questions, when they score at these late stages. And we constantly look at how that stage is filling out. Because it, you know, when we first worked with it, it had specific qualities that were there, but they were pretty they weren't very full, you know. Now we're getting more and more nuances, after 10 years of working. And then we know these people too. There are enough that we know every one of them. So we can't know every one of the 5.0 or even the 5.5, but we know most of the 6.0 and the 6.5 people. So I don't know if that helps you understand what we're doing.
Very much so. Yeah, very much so. There's a couple of reflections I had along the way, some of which I've forgotten because we covered so much ground, but I'll try and rewind back. I didn't want to interrupt though, because it was such a great soundbite to go through all of them individually. One of the ones I want to go back to is that the conversation we had around the 19-year-old and pulling up that stage of life where you are starting to stretch, strive, and you're looking for mentors and things like that. And the thing that actually popped into my head was a piece of research I was exposed to, I think it was about a year and a bit ago, where someone said that they'd done a study on tastes in music and how there was a correlation found between lasting taste in music and the music you were listening to when you were 19. And they could almost put it down to the year. What you were listening to when you were 19 will carry for the rest of your life. And I think it's really interesting to sit that side by side with that developmental stage to say, well, that's at a point in time where you're looking for mentors and you're looking for guidance and you're asking the world, well, who has the wisdom that can be shared with me at that particular time? So that was something that lit up. Is there any thoughts, or have you seen that yourself?
I haven't noticed that, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. There's so many things to notice, and there are so many things to read about this that you could say, oh, certainly. And then, you read it and I didn't. So
no, absolutely. It's interesting where things like this triangulate and you can start to say, oh yeah, no, that makes sense. From a totally different perspective, using the developmental model, I can see how that would make sense, which is super interesting. The other one that I thought, and it has come up in the podcast previously, but I thought I might ask you to expand a little bit on it, was that green stage, because I think just given the state of the world and that we're in right now, particularly in that achiever space where we're really trying to strive and create and do and protect and brand and God knows what else, it is that step in the right direction. But with that comes, you alluded to it a little bit, with that comes some internal work. And we've talked about it as almost like dealing with your demons, like that element of development where you get into that green stage and you actually have to integrate some of the work that you may have left behind along the way. Is that some of what you've seen as well? Or I can't exactly remember how you put it, but
What we see is the building blocks. They start seeing the building blocks. Building blocks come up at the egocentric stage, concrete, the subtle building blocks that this stage works with. The achiever stage, the 3.5 stage is thinking, feeling, and behavior. And they don't know for a long time that those three things are connected. But this is what metacognition is about. And metacognition is a really very advanced and remarkable way of engaging. And my brother Kim always talks about thinking about your thinking. And of course, that's where you can start to strategize. You can look at your thinking and say, oh, there's a flaw in my thinking there. There's a flaw in my thinking there. There's a flaw in my thinking there. But he also says you can feel about your feelings. Oh, I'm feeling so bad right now. Why am I feeling that bad? And can I change my, then you can behave then they start seeing the connection between them. Like, I can think about my feelings too, and I can think about my behavior. Well, if I behave a certain way, my thinking changes and my emotions change. If I have an emotion, my thinking changes and my behavior changes. They start seeing that these three building blocks are really tied together. And it's very, very interesting. And this is the basis of CBT. Cognitive behavioral therapy, of course, that really resonates with people at this stage because they start really understanding these are the three building blocks: thinking, feeling, and behavior, thinking, emotions, and behavior. And there's quite a bit of research on this, as well. What happens though, when they transform into the next stage is that thinking, feeling, and behavior come together, and they see that they can't be separated. And suddenly that becomes one of your interior parts. Oh, I've got a thinking, behavior, and feeling scared child there, and they're thinking this way, and they're feeling this way, and they're behaving this way. And sometimes that causes me to behave this way. Oh, I've got this very spiritual part inside of me, and it's thinking this way, it's feeling. So they're starting to identify parts then inside of themselves because of these thinking, feeling, and behavior relationships that they have. Now, the 3.5 level looks at those three things, and at first they don't see that they're that connected. They just say, yeah, until they really start understanding. And when they get that understanding, oftentimes they'll pop into, 4.0, the next stage, because it's the later part. It's an amazing way of dealing and making meaning in your life is to use those three things together. Is that what you were referring to?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think some of the self-realizations you get along the way, and that prompts me to the other question that I had as you were going through those stages, and it's to do with the subtle tier. In your experience, what role does the ego play in the subtle tier? Because it seems like it's very much there, but it's also more self-actualized and more.
So you're talking about the ego?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, I can tell you that Lovinger knew about this, and she had different stems and and categories that she created around the ego, and they were at the 3.0 and 3.5 stage, or the expert achiever stage. And that's where it arose. And of course, egocentric is the downshift of that. Yeah. And what's the upshift? This transpersonal 5.5 stage. Yeah. And they see their subtle ego. And that ego is right there, but you can't see the ego you're in, so you can see the ego you used to be in, but you can't see the ego you're in. And so, the 3.5 sees the concrete ego, and they look at it and the 5.5 sees the subtle ego. They don't know they're still in an ego. We're still in an ego. All 12 stages have some representation of ego in it that we can score and trace, but people don't see the ego that they're in. It makes me wonder what I don't see about myself. Yeah.
I think in that lies the certainly since Pete's introduced me to developmental theory and going through this work, it is one of those points of humility and those checks where it is you can't see your own shadow. And you can't see the ego you're in. You're very much held to account of, but what do I not know about myself? What is it as well integrated as I think I am, as self-actualized as I hope I am? Where are my dark spots? And do we ask different questions about that at different stages as we develop? Like, are we more internally working at different stages versus potentially working with others to find those points and work on ourselves? Does a coach make that much of a difference at certain stages and less of a difference at other stages?
Well, you have to point your coaching to the stage of the person you're working with, and not that you can have a holistic developmental stage where they usually land as in the holistic way. But if you're a coach, they come to you because they have an issue, right? So as a coach, you can't just look at the person and know what their developmental level is, because they're going to present at the level of their issue. They might present lower than their whole capacity is. Is that right?
Yeah.
So the point is, you need to find out what is the developmental of the trouble that they're in. Why are they seeking help from you? And that's at a developmental level too. So you have to look at where these developmental perspectives lie. And those developmental perspectives of an issue probably lie oftentimes in a part, a developmental part. Developmental parts are a big part of your shadow. Sometimes it's just a skill, though. And it's not, that there's anything wrong. It's just that people don't have the skills that they need, if you ask a medical doctor to, preach a sermon on Sunday, that might not be as easy for him, So, the skills just don't work that way. And then it might also be a transformation because you have that leading edge. And sometimes we get into trouble because we don't know we're in a transformation. We think something is terribly wrong, and actually something is right. Something is terribly right. You're moving along, you're growing, you're developing, but it doesn't feel that way at first. You're confused, you're mixed up, you don't know what's going on. And so, there's all those kinds of things that any kind of coach would want to work with. And, we have programs that teach people how to do that, they can notice the parameters that the person is working in. The answers to those 3 questions that I talked about, they can just see that in the moment, and they can identify the level then of their issue and what they need to work with. That doesn't mean that the whole person, if he's going to take he or she's going to take an inventory, may score at a later level, because they have in the inventories, there's 36 contexts instead of the 1 context of the issue. So using these 2 processes together really make for skilled coaching. And so we do work with both of those processes as well, so that people can learn how to do that. And I did want to say something about arrogance, because if you think about arrogance and you think, I'm so arrogant, I just am so arrogant. Well, that's really a humble statement, isn't it? And if you're saying, oh, I'm so humble, I'm the most humble person in the world, that's really kind of arrogant, isn't it? So can't you see how the opposing poles start to come together so that you're in a middle place with them? John Kessler works with a lot of these opposing poles, and how you can bring them together in a kind of a still point. So, there's so many different ways of dealing with these things, but recognizing how the polar pairs actually mirror themselves in an opposite way. And that capacity to see these opposing poles in that vein usually comes up at this 5.5 stage. And there's a bunch of them, but the arrogance and humility is one of them that's really, really fun to play with.
Fantastic.
So what do you think? So I think what would be useful, and obviously they don't have to be absolutely correct, Terri, but if you could give us a talk through, because people talk about these stages, and whenever you bring this up, everybody always thinks they're at the 5.5 and above stage. And then when we talk about statistics of where people are at and what's the proportion of the population that might be at each particular stage, could you give us a run through where, approximately, like, what's the distribution of stages through the population that you've experienced, just so people have a calibration of, okay, there's these 12 stages, and, what percentage of the population?
To be honest with you, we don't really give statistics out, because we know what our population is. And our population is primarily 4.5 strategists, the developmental level, the developmentalist level, up through 6.5. We have some of the 4.0s, some of the 3.5s, and some of the 3.0s there, but it's not our population is not distributed. It's distributed to the high end, because we have measures at those later ends. And so what we would have in our population would be higher statistics at the high end than is in the population. And we don't know what it's like in the population. So we don't usually say, we could say what it is in our population. We have thousands of people there, but thousands of people in a 7 or 8 billion person world is really not saying much, So that's the way we have to work with it, because we don't want to delude people one way or the other. And so it's a very good question. I know a lot of people who have asked that question. So what is the percentage? And they give us good guesses. The problem is, I have never seen a true population study, where they took a population of the world and did actual testing with, like 1 million or 2 million or 5 million people, and then took a true distribution statistic to it. I'd love to know if they've ever done that, but I don't think they have. It's just too big of a project. But with AI these days, that is a possibility. At some point, AI will be able to give these tests to people, and they will be accurate enough. They won't be accurate enough to tell the person where they are, but over a large body of people, they will be accurate enough that they can give those kinds of statistics. You could do it on a country, you could do it on a state, you could do it on the whole world, you could do you could do it on a government. Those would be useful statistics to know. And I would love to see people take that on. Tom Murray has a stage lens AI project that he's working on that I think will at some point have that capacity. So, I mean,
I've read a bit of his work that he's working on, and he's been evolving that over quite a few years now.
He's a fantastic person. He works with us a lot. We would be nowhere where we are now if it wasn't for Tom and all of his tireless work with us. So
yeah,
we're very, very grateful for Tom's work.
What do you think the stage model has to offer? So two-part question. Part A is, what's the value of the stages model to leadership in this emerging context that we're moving into in 2022, and also for the future of work?
The thing about the stages model is that it can dip into granular and layered level organizations and problems, and identify what the level of their organizational issue is, and what a leader's issue is. We also have the leadership stages model. We have identified a number of different qualities that happen at each different stage. People can look at that when they get their results back. They know, exactly what the markers are for leadership at each developmental level. It helps them look at what the possibility, things that they might grow into that they aren't aware of yet. So there's just so many areas. One of the things that I note that I'm very, I'm curious about, and I don't see very often, is that I don't see organizations, especially large organizations, make developmental shifts. They tend to get frozen. And we desperately need to have these organizations evolve. They can prevent all of humanity from evolving. People work in these organizations and they can get stuck inside of the organization too. And so I am really open to and very supportive of finding healthy ways for organizations to evolve in a way that is not too painful too painful of a change for the people who work inside of the organization, because change is always hard for so many people. It's upsetting. And so how you can take the kinds of steps that will be helpful for people, and how a person can be encouraged to evolve themselves inside of an organization, so that they aren't stuck in a job just because they're good at it. They have a chance to always hit the refresh button and step into later capacities. There's so many things that can happen with this whole process with leadership. There are a variety of kinds of leadership. We often think of, I'm a leader, and so I'm the guy at the top. But there's leadership that comes from the bottom. There's leadership that comes from within. There's collective leadership. How can we look at a variety of different kinds of leadership processes? My contention is that no one person can always see everything about themselves. And that feedback is always very good, but sometimes, having a collective leadership is not necessarily a bad thing. I don't know, the other thing is what is the purpose of your organization? And the purpose will tell you about your developmental level of the organization. It starts telling you that your vision, your mission, and your purpose. And it would be a really good exercise, I think, for a lot of CEOs to look at, to just try to develop, okay, if this was a 3.0 organization, what would the purpose look like? If this was an Achiever 3.5, what would that purpose look like? What if it was 4.0? What would my bottom line be with people that have that kind of view? Would that ever fit me? Is there something about that that might work in this organization? What about the 4.5 developmental perspective? I think those kinds of exercises for people who are running leaders of big businesses are important. And also, the other thing that I know is that emotions are developmental. People don't think about emotions as being developmental, but at the concrete tier, they're glad, mad, sad, and scared. And they come up with compassion and joy and empathy, vulnerability, lightheartedness, gratitude. All of these come up at the subtle tier and on up. Most CEOs and leaders don't think so much about the developmental level of emotions. And they also don't really adhere to the understanding that we need 3 times, and not just the understanding, but the research behind that we need 3 times as many positive emotions as challenging ones in our day-to-day life. And they don't keep track of that. And so, that's not a practice they work with. But all the difference in the world is made in an organization where you have, positive emotions all around you, and teach other people and be in a place where there's a positive atmosphere that doesn't happen by itself. And the larger the organization, the more difficult it is to get that siphoned down all the way from the bottom to the top. I mean, there's so many things like that can be worked on. And, to me, it's a never ending possibility that is just a delightful way to think about things. But each organization is different, and they each have their own place. And I just think there's so many things that one could do.
Organizations are truly interesting in the combinations. And I think it's really interesting that you pointed out that the development of emotion, yet in most organizations, people can't even connect behavior to emotion, and the fact that there's a cause and effect between those two things. And it's really interesting to me, to people that come in at that achiever stage and it's doing. Very few stop and think, hang on, why am I doing this in the first place? And at what point is the doing not adding any more value by doing more and more of it? So that's like, stop, think about it for a second. And it's like, actually, I don't even know why I'm doing this anymore. And the fact that during that doing, I've upset all these people, but I haven't reconciled the fact that my doing is the thing that's caused that as they've moved through it, because it's just action orientation. So
that's right. Yeah, it really does make a difference. Every time I score an inventory, I give people an audit of their emotions, and I give them an audit of their cognition, and I give them an audit of their action orientation. I give them an audit of their intersubjectivity. I give them an audit of their framing and their, foundational structural aspects. And then what they share of shadow. A lot of people don't know they share shadow, but most people do share a shadow. They just don't know they are.
So they tell us what that means exactly, because it comes up a lot when I talk to people, and I find it really interesting that 99.999% of people have no idea what you're talking about when it comes to
shadow. You mean?
Yeah, but it's one of the most transformational, powerful integration things that you can do.
Yes. Well, there is shadow that you don't know you have. Then there's shadow that you know you have, but you don't know what to do with it. And those are the ones we usually find in the inventory. But there's one shadow that people have that most people don't know that they have, and that is the projections. And we've worked with projections for a long, long time. I know, Pete, you worked with it in our GTC program. We always have that. And that is that you have you have people begin to practice that, notice when they're judging somebody else. They notice when they're judging, and through the day, they just jot down every judgment that they make. Then at the end of the day, they sit down and they look at, okay, I judged Mary because she was being kind of caustic. And then they turn that back on themselves and say, am I ever caustic? Oh my gosh, I am caustic. The other one, you say, oh, this person is the most beautiful, has the most beautiful way of explaining things. I just can't imagine how anybody could put such a good explanation to these complex topics. You turn that back on yourself and you notice, by golly, you have that too. You have those positive things in you. And if you deny those positive things, that seed is not going to grow. So you don't want to deny the positive things in you. You want to encourage them, and it will grow and get better and better. So, any kind of judgment at all is a projection, and it's a way to see something that's in yourself that you either are not going to cultivate, or else you're cultivating and you don't even know it, and it's not such a good cultivation. So this is one of the areas that we work with a lot. Projections are everywhere. Psychotherapists project on their clients all the time. Because they're many of them are at the 3.5 achiever level, and you don't usually see that until they get to the 4.5 strategist level, where they understand development. So, but you can teach it, and people can learn it, and that will help them.
Yeah, it is, and I've found with people that psychodynamically, that when people are working with shadow, like, so much of their energy is spent on projecting out onto everybody else, that when they can actually start to claim those back, like, and they're not projecting that energy and defending with that energy all the time, that their energy levels go up because they've regained, or they're not projecting out or bleeding all this energy into the environment. So, it's quite an amazing process.
It really is an amazing process. And one of the things I love about it is that at the beginning of 5.0, with the construct aware stage, the first stage in the MetAware tier, people see that their projections in the moment. They don't have to even reflect on it. So they may look at somebody and as soon as they see their judgment, they'll say, oh my gosh, they may be having an argument with somebody. They may say to them, oh my gosh, I see that I'm judging you for blah, blah, blah. And I see I have that in me too. This is an area that, that we need to work on together. Maybe we can heal ourselves if we work on it together. Will you remind me when and I'll remind you, and, you can get into, like, husband and wife can do that kind of stuff, because then you're helping each other get better so you can get closer. Instead of getting madder because they're projecting on you and you're projecting on them, and they don't know they're projecting on you, and you don't know that you're projecting on them, and it's a downward spiral all the way, And this happens in leadership too, So we just don't realize how much we judge.
Yeah,
it's a never ending. It continues to emerge. The understanding of it continues to emerge, I think, all of our lives.
I agree. So as we're getting sort of towards the end of an hour, which is usually towards the length of our podcast, have you got any, we talked about the stages, the tier model. We talked about GTC as a program where you've obviously deployed this model to quite effect as a research study over, have to be 10 or so years now, I think, if not more. Now you've moved away and you're with Stages International, where you've taken your framework and you've built that into a business. For people who want to learn more about the Stages model, and people who want to maybe take an introductory, or for that matter, a more complex course, is there anything that you're running at the moment that people could get in touch with? Can we direct them to a website? What courses would you recommend for people who want to start putting their little toe in the water, or the whole body, as jump in the pool if they want? where they could go to sort of learn about this more?
Well, we are launching a whole new website. It won't be out until March, and we're going to have a bunch of new um, courses on it. The first ones will be introductory, and then we'll have some medium ones, like we have one on developmental confusions. That is an interesting course that people can take. We will have a kind of a why. One will go off into personal development. That one will culminate in what we have called the Mind's Eye course, where people learn about how they developed in each stage. We go through a month of exploration of our own development, our own personal development for each stage. So it takes 12 months to go through that. And it is a real eye opener, I think, for most people, to understand what was the characteristics of the way that they were born, were raised, the context around them, all of that, that caused them to be in to engage in the stage that they were at, in the perspectives they were at when they were at these different developmental levels, and how does that influence how they are today. So we've got that one, and then we have a professional route that we will have people go through. And that one will be a developmental coaching, and they will be able to use the stages model to learn how to sit in front of their client and make a determination of the three parameters, answer the three parameters of themselves, because they'll be so skilled in their observations. We'll teach them how to do that. And to see what the developmental level is of their leading edge, of their regular day-to-day life, and also their trailing edge, and identify, some shadow issues, so that they can use that in their coaching along with a scored inventory, and that will give them more the developmental level of the issue that the person has, and also the developmental level of the whole person with the if they take the inventory. We'll teach them how to debrief the inventory so that they can really, use it themselves. They can get on the inside of how those inventories work, and actually do a debrief with the client. So that we'll have a lot of different kinds of processes that will allow people to sink deeper and deeper and deeper into these capacities and these nuances of the stages model, whether they want to go off on the personal veer, and if they want to go off on the professional. Some people take both. Some people have actually taken both at the same time, which is a little bit of it's a lot, but you'd be surprised how much people can manage. But that won't be up on our new website probably until the very first week of March. Okay. So we're getting there, and we're looking forward to it. We have a website. It's stagesinternational.com, and you can go there, but you won't find all of the things that we're planning on that website yet. And so just to let you know, we're hoping that you'll keep coming back and see what we have to offer as time goes on.
Yep. And we'll put links to all of that in the show notes in the podcast as well, so people can link through. And I imagine that when the new website goes up, it'll still be at the same website address. So clicking on that link will take them to the new website. It'll all be
international, stagesinternational.com. Yes, it will.
And people can still, without having to do courses and whatnot, people can still just acquire an inventory and a debrief just separately if they want to?
Yes.
Okay, and there's links to that on the website as well, I would imagine?
I haven't been to that website for a while, so I'd have to check, to be honest with you. We're working so hard on the new one that I don't really remember everything that's on that website. But they can always send an email to support@stagesinternational.com, and we'll find anything for them while we're in our reconfiguration. We're evolving a little bit here, and so we have to make things change. So that's where we are.
Excellent. So in closing, if you had to boil, and I know this is a big question, if you had to boil all of your research and all of your findings and the development that you've experienced and witnessed yourself down into three things that people should, if you had three things that people could focus on out there to help them develop and move through those stages, what would the three things, the most important things be?
I'm not sure I understand your question. What are the three things I would recommend for somebody that
Yeah, if someone who's wanting to progress through the stages, if there was three things that they would focus on, based on your work, what would be the three things that you would think would accelerate the development?
Stages is vertical, but that's not all it is. It's vertical, it's horizontal, and it's diagonal. It's like a balloon. You see a baby at a birth, and it's like a little tiny balloon that isn't blown up. But through each of the stages, it blows up and it blows up and into a big healthy balloon. If you blow the balloon up so that it's tall and skinny, it's going to fall over. If you blow the balloon up so that it's tall and skinny this way, horizontally, it's never going to reach any height. So what we're understanding from this, in order to have a big round balloon, you have to be healthy at every single stage. So we do not encourage people to try and hurry through the developmental levels. What we encourage is get really healthy at each stage, confront your shadow, look at the confusions that you're in, and you will just float to the next level easily. You won't even have to, it's not a matter of trying to get there. It's a matter of being really healthy. You know that if you have a triangle that's sitting on a peak like this, it's going to fall over. And so if you have a very unhealthy 1.0 and 1.5 and 2.0, it's very difficult to have a healthy at those other levels. And we see this happening with people who are, some of our political figures who had really unhealthy development in their early stages. And we find that they may have some capacities to, at the 3.0 and 3.5 stage, but their shadow in their developmental immaturity is so poor that they really can't engage in a way that's healthy for their countries. And we see a number of those people around the world. So we know how important it is to be healthy. And if you had an unhealthy upbringing, you can get some help and you can revamp that. You can change your upbringing. You literally can change your upbringing and be a healthy person. And then you can just much more easily just gradually move through those developmental stages. So I just recommend you do your work.
Yeah. And so if you had, if we could then issue our listeners with a challenge to kind of go into the next month and say, right, in order to do that, to get really tangible with an action item, what would be something you would challenge our listeners to go off and give something a go?
I would ask them to, number one, is confront their shadow. Mm-hmm. The number two thing would be, especially if they're in a confusion, if they're just feeling really confused about something, to not make the assumption that something's wrong with them, to check and see if that's a transformation, because people mistake that so often. And everybody goes through transformations in their life and they don't know that they've transformed until after it's over. But if you can learn to recognize your transformation in the messiness of it, you can learn to be lighthearted about it. And this is where the lighthearted emotion comes up. If you're lighthearted, and even your family might be saying, what's wrong with her? And there might not be anything wrong. There may be everything right. If you know a little bit about how transformation feels and how confusing it is, you can just be lighthearted and say, oh, I know I'm being kind of silly right now, but I'll be better later, or make some joke out of it. And if you're lighthearted, they will be lighthearted too. So that's one of the important areas, is to, just because you're having trouble doesn't always mean something is wrong. So check that out. Check it out and see if it's wrong, if there's something that needs work. But also check out and see if it's maybe just a transformation. That's an area. I mean, most people know some things about developmental levels once they reach the interest of that, but a lot of people don't really know, the confusing aspect of the transformation process, and to consider in their own mind, maybe something right is going on with me.
It's
fantastic.
Very, very insightful.
Absolutely. That's very, very good. Terri, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate you making the time to join us on the podcast today. And we've certainly learned a lot. I've certainly learned a lot. So thank you very much.
I really enjoyed this too. I appreciate your invitation and I've had a great time. Thank you so much too.
Awesome. Thank you, Terri. That's the end of today's episode. Thanks for listening. What's Next is brought to you by The Next. We are workplace futurists and transformation facilitators. You can reach us on the web at www.thenextnxt.com.au. Please ensure you subscribe to our channel to ensure you don't miss our up and coming episodes.